Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack and today I am here with a car that is quite close to my heart actually. I've always really liked the 12C. There's something else that's really quite fascinating about these cars. The competitor at the time was the Ferrari 458. Now by all measures that is a fantastic car, but in all objective ways the 12C was a better car. It was more comfortable, it was lighter, it was faster. It's more usable. But if you look at the prices now, one of these is almost half the price of a 458. And that is very strange. I'm going to talk about some of the criticisms that were levied at this car at launch, try and work out if they are still valid today, and then make a decision on whether this really, or whether the 458 really is double this car, or whether this is one of the biggest bargains around. I'll give you a hint, I'm erring towards the latter.
Thank you to Bidding Classics for sponsoring today's video. Check out this online auction for classic cars with no buyer's fees.
Before we take it out, let's talk a little bit about the tech that makes this car so special, but also one of the biggest criticisms levied at the time, and that was that it just doesn't look special enough. Personally, I think that's crazy. I think the 12C has actually aged much better, for example, than the 458. Yes, the Ferrari is perhaps a little bit more dramatic, but this is a much more balanced design. And Frank Stevenson, who penned this car, purposely wanted to make something different from the Italian supercars to distinguish this from the products that came from Italy. So, to me, the design has always worked, and I actually found it a little bit of a shame that under pressure for the cars that followed this, when they did the facelift version of, they went with that sort of much more sort of swoopy, dramatic nose, which isn't ugly in and of itself, but just doesn't fit in my view, with the rest of the design. Ultimately, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but I think that these have matured really well and will continue to do so. So this one is a later car, so thankfully it has a button that you can feel under it. The original cars were literally just painted there, and there was a sensor, which apparently does work quite well, but you have to get used to it. This is a little bit more intuitive, a little bit easier really. Look at the way those doors open, love that. The 12C really was so incredibly ahead of the game. Firstly, let's look at the chassis. It was a one-piece, single-pressing carbon fibre chassis, and it weighed just 80 kilograms. Pretty rare for a car of this type at the time. Not just that, but previously, a design of this type would have taken, to lay in carbon fibre, would have taken about 400 hours. McLaren pioneered a new technique which meant each chassis could be made in just 4 hours, making it commercially possible to have in what was pretty much a mass production mini supercar like this. But it doesn't end there. The 12C had incredibly advanced electronics. It had an open rear diff, but it had clever electronics working on the brakes that meant that you didn't need a mechanical limited slip differential. It also has hydraulically linked dampers. It's a system a little bit similar to the Citroën one, but this car uses conventional springs, and because of the way it is set up, it doesn't need anti-roll bars at all, and gives, as we shall see, an absolutely magic carpet-like ride. Another radical departure is that it used a turbo engine. It was designed by Ricardo, 3.8 litres, 616 horsepower, made it an incredibly quick thing, and on top of that, it is still really economical. 22 miles to the gallon in completely normal driving is absolutely achievable. If you're careful, you can do much better than that. Crazy for a car of this type. And again, at the time, maybe it didn't matter so much. But now, when we are so much more interested about efficiency and climate change and all the rest of it, it's just in every single way the 12C was ahead of the game. The biggest criticism, though, was levelled at how this car drives. So let's see if it's true. One thing I do have to say is certainly On startup, the engine sounds purposeful. It sounds a little bit rough. Probably a little bit rougher than you'd get in another car of this type. I wouldn't say it's unpleasant, I would say it's purposeful, but the first impressions just on startup, by no means a deal breaker, of the engine are not the best. Just mud everywhere here, got to go a bit slower, I don't want to get his car too coated in stuff. Thanks so much to Jason who brought the car down today. 3 hours he drove to get here. Not just that, but it was rain all the way, and he normally never takes this in the rain. So thanks so much, buddy. I really appreciate it. Now, one of the things that I do really like is that there are no buttons on the steering wheel. I know all the modern Ferraris have that. I personally don't like it. I like a more driver-focused cabin in the sense that the wheel is the wheel. You've got a horn on it, and that's about it. Now, these paddles are just great. Again, some people don't like it. It's a cantilevered system, so when you pull on the right, you automatically push down. It automatically pushes down on this side. So that means that I can change up either by pushing down on the left or by pulling up on the right, and vice versa. Let's look at the modes. So active mode, and then I am going to put it in normal mode like this. The suspension is astounding. The way it deals with bumps, trust me, you've got to get into one of these to believe it. The only limiting factor is that it has less travel than, say, something like a Rolls would have, but the way it controls the bumps is eerily similar. Not quite Rolls level, but it does approach it. So I'm going to put it in sport because this is a bumpy road and I don't want this grounding out or anything like that. I want a little bit more control, and even in sport, it's really not that bad. The engine is in sport mode already, which gives a little bit more noise and a little bit of a sharper response, and speeds up the gearbox as well. Second gear. So straight away there, you could feel it scrabbling. Still good traction if you realise how quick this thing is moving. Gearbox to me feels hyper responsive. I don't drive a lot of the modern stuff. I'm sure that if you were, I don't know, if you were fully au fait with the latest offerings, you'd probably find that this gearbox is now a little bit behind the times. Tends to track cambers a little bit, but then it is quite you know, it's a wide tired car. The way the engine produces the power is really interesting because you get that first wave of torque around 3.5 and it responds like you would expect a turbo engine to respond, but then at 6.5 it has a second wind and it really picks up again until 8.5. Some of the criticisms made about it not feeling charismatic enough as an engine, I do have some sympathy for, because it's not that the sound isn't there, the sound is there. Right, let's go. What a car! I can't believe how secure it feels accelerating, how much grip it has just from two-wheel drive. It is pretty astonishing. I do have a little bit of sympathy for, I think, some of the criticism that was levelled at the engine at the time. It's not that it doesn't, it's really hard to put your finger on. Of course, on startup, sounds a little bit more agricultural than you'd expect. But apart from that, when you're driving around, it makes a pretty nice noise. It's just not charismatic. And definitely a 458 has an engine which has more soul, which has a more interesting feel to it. But I do like the dual nature of this, the fact that you can kind of ride on the torque at lower speeds and take advantage of that aspect of a turbocharged engine. But if you rev it up to the top, as I'm about to do now, What a car! I can't believe how it deals with this road. It just demolishes it. It is stunning. The steering is absolutely perfectly judged. It's pretty quick, but in no way feels nervous. You get loads of feel without it being in any way heavy. The front end of the 12C is simply glued to the road. At no point do I feel like there's going to be absolutely any movement. It gives you lots and lots of confidence. Truly stunning. Couple of other things that people didn't really like at the time. Obviously, we've mentioned the engine, and although I have a little bit of sympathy for that, I think ultimately it was a car that was just too far ahead of the time. Now they're all turbocharged. I think people would be a little bit more understanding of the characteristics that this 3.8 has. But in any case, the infotainment system is obviously now horribly dated, but was always a little bit tricky to use. I think it had a lot of glitches. If you tried to connect up your phone, didn't really work very well. But the way the ergonomics of the car itself are set out are perfect. Having all the track control gubbins there, exactly where you want them. Right, here's the technical little S. And how does it go down here? Comfortably faster than anything else I've been in is the answer. And feeling utterly unflustered. Comes in here perfectly stable, not at all upset by the bumps. Not at all. Left-hander. I've never gone down this road so fast, and this thing is just incredible. The faster you sort of throw it in, and the better it seems to respond. Perhaps for drivers like me who aren't really very special, or pretty average, let's be honest, it's almost just too good. Perhaps that's why it was accused so much of just not being special enough. I think a 458 driven slower than this would flatter you a bit more in terms of giving you a bit more emotion, but in terms of outright capability, this is unbeatable. So I think some of the main negatives that were levelled at this at the time, that it was a bit joyless, that it was a bit too clinical in every way, going from the looks to the sound of the engine to the way it handled. I think they were a little bit unfair. I can understand why they were made at the time, because I think this car is just too good, really. And I think partly it's down to the car coming out before the audience was fully ready for it, and perhaps before they were fully ready for this type of car from a British manufacturer. McLaren brought out a car which was distinctively British. It was different from the Italian offerings, and a lot of the journalists criticised it for doing that. I think that was a little bit unfair, really. I still don't fully understand why there is such a big difference in value between this and a 458. There is one more factor that we must consider, and that is perceived quality and reliability. To me, if you look at the way this is put together, the way it feels, it looks like a well put together quality product. The cars that came after this especially did suffer, or there is a reputation that they suffered from cosmetic defects. There are also some reliability worries, especially with the gearbox. The problem is that these gearboxes can develop a leak. If they do, although I think some independents are now doing it, until recently the only solution was to replace a gearbox entirely at a massive cost. That puts people off. You do have to understand though that it's less than 5% of the gearboxes that were affected by that. As I said, there was glitches as well with the infotainment system. These temperature controls on the side, to me, a stroke of genius having them here rather than in the middle of the car. Passenger has one, driver has one. They are super simple to operate. They feel good. The switchgear is nice. But there is a downside. These screens there, the display screens for the temperature, they tend to fail. If they do fail, then it's another big cost to get them repaired. It is said that cars with a soft close hinge like this one, that takes away that problem. I've spoken to other people who say it is actually the electronics behind the screen that causes the problem. Either way, there are a couple of reliability issues for sure. But the 458 isn't perfect either, and I really don't think that they justify the massive difference in price. In short, I think that the 12C is an absolute bargain at the moment. You can get a nice car for £75,000. I don't think you can go faster for the money. Not just faster, but more interesting. A unique car, different from everything else. The McLaren's that came after, they made them much more showy. This is the very first of the breed. It introduced some completely different concepts to this market space. And I think it absolutely is deserving. And it will be, trust me, this will be a car which is going to go up in value when people realise, because it is fantastic and unique. Thank you all so much for watching. If you've got something, if you've got a car that you'd like me to review, please get in touch either Instagram or at my email address. And I really look forward to seeing you for the next video. What a car!